The morning sun had just begun to rise over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the Kansas plains. It should have been an ordinary day, birds chirping, cattle stirring, wind rustling through the cottonwoods. But nothing about this day was ordinary. Not for Tobias Whitfield, not for anyone who lived within earshot of his farm. Because outside his barn, like a living wall of silence and purpose, stood 200 Apache warriors, motionless, expressionless, waiting. They formed a line so perfect, so unnervingly still, it seemed as though the earth itself had exhaled and paused in reverence. The horses didn't move, the riders didn't speak, their presence wasn't loud, but it was deafening in its meaning. Something had happened, something sacred, something dangerous, and every settler for miles could feel it in their bones. Inside the barn, pressed against the rough wooden wall, Tobias gripped his Winchester rifle like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. His weathered hands trembled, not from age, but from the sickening uncertainty clawing at his heart. Through a narrow gap between the wooden boards, he watched them, painted faces, spears gleaming, eyes unblinking, fixed on his home. But the terror tightening around his chest wasn't just for himself. It was for his daughter, Emma, 8 years old, full of fire and laughter. She had been playing near the creek just an hour ago, chasing dragonflies and building forts out of mud and sticks. Tobias had only stepped away to check on a sick calf. 1 hour. That's all it took for everything to unravel. Now she was gone, and the most feared warriors in the Kansas territory stood outside his home, not in fury, not in violence, but in silence, in ceremony, as if they were waiting for something bigger than war. His mind ran wild with possibilities. Had they taken Emma? Were they here to return her? Were they here to burn his home to the ground? His thoughts were interrupted as one of the warriors began to move, slowly, deliberately, unlike the rest, who remained perfectly still. This one dismounted with grace and purpose. Even at a distance, Tobias saw the difference. The eagle feathers braided into his hair, the scars across his chest, the reverent way the others watched him. This was a leader, a man of deep significance. He began walking toward the barn. Tobias held his breath, and then, the impossible happened. The warrior spoke, in perfect English. Tobias Whitfield, I am Standing Eagle of the Mescalero Apache. We need to talk. The words, though calm, carried a weight Tobias wasn't ready for. They shook him more than any weapon ever could. The fact that this man knew his name, knew exactly who he was terrifying enough. But the tone, so respectful, so careful, it wasn't the voice of a man delivering threats. It was the voice of someone extending something else. Something that didn't match the fear clawing at Tobias's chest. Love and hope rarely look like cavalry charges or peace treaties. Sometimes, they look like a solemn warrior standing in a field, offering dialogue instead of destruction. And when Standing Eagle continued, Tobias's world tilted. Your daughter, he said, did something yesterday that my people have never seen from a white child. Something that demands our attention. Those words struck Tobias like a bell inside his chest. Emma, this wasn't about war. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about her, his little girl with the corn silk hair and the smile that made his wife's death bearable. Whatever she had done, it had changed something far beyond her understanding. He tightened his grip on the rifle, not out of fear anymore, but out of protective instinct. If they were here to take her, they'd have to go through him. But the warrior's eyes weren't threatening. They were searching, honest, and what Tobias saw in them wasn't hatred. It was something far stranger. Something like reverence. As the wind stirred the prairie grass, Tobias caught his breath and realized something he hadn't expected. He wanted to believe this man. He wanted to believe there was a reason behind this gathering beyond war and death. A reason rooted in something gentler. In love. In hope. Because if Emma was at the heart of this, and if they had come not to destroy but to honor, then maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to bridge a divide that had always felt impossibly wide. It began, not with treaties or orders, but with a father stepping out of his hiding place. Tobias emerged from the barn slowly, the sun casting long shadows across his farm. As he did, 200 Apache warriors shifted ever so slightly, hands closer to weapons, but none were drawn. They simply watched as a father dared to hope. Watched as a man chose love over fear. Watched as the first steps were taken toward something neither side fully understood, but both could feel was sacred. Blank. Underscore. Blank. The creek behind the Whitfield farm had always been a place of comfort. It was where Emma spent countless afternoons playing under the shade of cottonwoods, their leaves whispering lullabies in the breeze. There, she found magic in the simplest things, smooth stones shaped like hearts, frogs hiding under lily pads, and the songs of the birds that visited from faraway lands. To Emma, it was a place of peace. To Lone Wolf, a dying Apache warrior, it was the place he chose to draw his final breath. Tobias didn't know any of this when Standing Eagle stepped forward with solemn grace, speaking in that calm, deliberate voice. "Your daughter found one of my warriors yesterday," he said, "a man dying beside your creek. She did something no white child has ever done." Tobias's heart pounded. Whatever Emma had done, she had done it alone, with no guidance, no understanding of the weight of her actions. He braced himself for the worst. She sat with him. Standing Eagle continued, his voice softened by wonder. "She didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't bring men with guns. She gave him her blanket." Tobias nearly collapsed. Her blanket. The blue wool one with the hand-stitched sunflowers. The one his late wife had sewn from love and memory. The one Emma had carried everywhere since she was a baby. She couldn't sleep without it. She didn't travel without it. It was her talisman, her treasure, her connection to a mother she barely remembered. And she had given it away, to a dying stranger. She saw that he was cold. Standing Eagle explained, she took the only thing she had, the thing she loved most, and she gave it to him without hesitation. Tears sprang into Tobias's eyes. He remembered holding Emma in that very blanket during winter storms. Remembered her falling asleep on his lap beside the fireplace, tiny fingers gripping the wool as if it anchored her to safety. Now, it had wrapped a dying warrior as he slipped into the next world. She held his hand. Standing Eagle said, reverence thick in his voice. She sang to him in her soft voice, songs a mother must have once sung to her. And when he passed, she laid wildflowers on his chest. She whispered something over his body. "A blessing, we think." Tobias said nothing, could say nothing. The weight of his daughter's innocence, and the strength behind it, left him breathless. In that moment, the field between him and the Apache wasn't filled with warriors. It was filled with love, with hope, with the echo of an act so pure, so deeply human, it transcended every line drawn between people, between cultures, between histories soaked in blood and misunderstanding. She had comforted a dying man, not because she knew who he was, not because she was taught to, but because she saw someone in pain and chose to offer warmth instead of fear. Standing Eagle stepped closer, and for the first time, Tobias noticed something unfamiliar in the warrior's eyes: gratitude. Deep, honest, unwavering gratitude. "No white person has ever honored one of our dying in this way," he said. "She gave Lone Wolf what all warriors pray for, dignity in death, peace in passing." And it was true. Tobias could feel it. His daughter, without knowing, had stepped into the sacred, not as a settler, not as a child, but as a soul recognizing another soul in need. It was an act of love. And through that love, a bridge had formed. Across cultures. Across centuries of distrust. Across the fears of fathers and the traditions of tribes. Standing Eagle's voice grew more solemn. "Our people believe that when someone shows such honor, they are forever tied to the spirit of the one they comforted. Your daughter is now bound to us. Bound, not in chains, not in law, but in spirit. A bond of love, not ownership." Tobias stared at the ground, overwhelmed. What had begun as fear, as a standoff, had become something sacred, something beautiful. Hope flickered in the silence between them, carried on the wind through the trees that had witnessed everything. Standing Eagle reached into his pouch and held out something small. It was Emma's blue hair ribbon, the one her mother had braided into her hair each morning before she passed away. Tobias took it with trembling hands, noting the dark stain on the fabric. Not all hope came without pain. There was blood, there was loss, but there was also love, unmistakable and enduring, and it had come from the heart of a little girl who simply couldn't walk away from someone in pain. In that moment, Tobias felt something shift deep within him. The fear he'd carried, of the Apache, of the unknown, of losing Emma, was replaced by something stronger. Pride. Because his daughter, in her innocence, had chosen kindness over caution. And love, once given freely, could change everything. Blank. Tobias held the hair ribbon in his hand like it was the most fragile thing in the world. The once vibrant blue fabric, a gift from his late wife to their daughter, now bore stains darker than dried mud, stains he could only interpret one way. Blood. His heart sank as Standing Eagle's voice drifted over the breeze, each word clear and deliberate, yet carrying the weight of a storm. These stains, the Apache leader said, do not belong to Lone Wolf. The world seemed to shift beneath Tobias's boots. The ribbon, Emma's ribbon, was left beside the body of the warrior she had comforted. But now, those brownish-red blotches whispered of something far worse. Emma hadn't just witnessed death. She had touched it, maybe even been touched by it. Fear gripped Tobias's chest like a vice, squeezing every breath from his lungs. His daughter, his little girl who still left her dolls under cottonwood trees and asked if stars had names, might be hurt. Alone, or worse. Where is she? He demanded, stepping forward despite the sea of warriors standing between him and Standing Eagle. Where is my daughter? But the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't cruel either. It came wrapped in layers of something deeper. Something Tobias hadn't expected: respect and sorrow. That, Standing Eagle said quietly, is what we need to discuss. And with those words, the ground beneath Tobias's life cracked open. According to our customs, the Apache leader continued, when someone honors our dead, they are bound to us. By law, by spirit, by something older than either of us can name. Tobias stared at him, trying to understand. The blood, the missing child, the silent standoff. None of it made sense until this moment. They weren't there to accuse. They weren't even there to punish. They were there to claim her. Not out of cruelty, not out of vengeance, but because, in their eyes, Emma was already one of them. Tobias's voice trembled as he spoke. She's 8 years old. She doesn't understand laws or tribal customs. She was just trying to help. Exactly, said Standing Eagle, his voice heavy with reverence. Which is why her actions carry such meaning. Compassion without expectation. Kindness offered to an enemy without hope of gain. That is the mark of a true Apache heart. The words were a bomb and a blow at once. Tobias felt pride swell in his chest. His little girl had done something beautiful, something sacred. But in the same breath, he felt the chill of loss. Because in honoring their traditions, the Apache might take her away from him. And then, as if summoned by the anguish in his soul, a sound broke the stillness. Help! A cry, high-pitched, faint, but unmistakable, echoed from the distance. A child's voice. Emma. It sliced through the silence like a lightning bolt, freezing every man in place. Hope surged into Tobias's chest so quickly it made him stagger. She was alive, somewhere, calling for him. But just as he took off running toward the sound, Standing Eagle's hand caught his arm. Firm and unmoving. Wait, the warrior commanded. Tobias whipped around in disbelief. That's my daughter crying. I know, but listen. This could be a trap. His voice wasn't callous. It was practical, weighted with experience. He explained how buffalo soldiers had used wounded children before. As bait. Tobias didn't care. I'm not leaving her out there, he growled. But Standing Eagle's grip didn't falter. If you die running blindly into an ambush, she will become ours by default. You must think like a father, not like a hero. It wasn't a threat. It was a terrible truth. Tobias's body trembled with the urge to run. But his heart, as battered as it was, knew the Apache leader spoke sense. With a single motion, Standing Eagle raised his hand, and 20 warriors melted from the line and vanished into the landscape. Their precision, their silence, their absolute unity, it was awe-inspiring. They didn't just move, they flowed. Tobias watched, torn between agony and admiration. These weren't raiders, they were protectors, and in that moment, he hoped with every fiber of his being that they could find her before it was too late. Minutes passed, each one an eternity. Then, a signal. One warrior returned and spoke softly in Apache. Standing Eagle turned to Tobias. She is there, alive, but trapped. The joy Tobias felt was immediate, immense, but short-lived. The shaft where she had fallen was unstable. Time was running out. Tobias's legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees. He should have been out searching for her. Instead, he'd been hiding in fear. The guilt was unbearable, but Standing Eagle knelt beside him, his voice low and steady. "This is your first test," he said. "The spirits have chosen it. You must choose. Rescue her your way and risk her life, or trust ours. And place your faith in what you do not understand." Tobias looked up, tears in his eyes. He wanted to scream, to fight, to take back control. But then he remembered Emma's ribbon in his hand. Her blood, yes, but also her courage. She had chosen compassion without fear, given love without knowing what it might cost. Could he do any less? "I'll trust you," Tobias whispered. "Just tell me what to do." Standing Eagle nodded, and as preparations for the rescue began, Tobias felt something stir within him. Not despair, not dread, but hope. Hope that the love his daughter had shared, so selfless, so unknowing, might just be the very thing that would bring her back. Blank. Blank. Tobias stood at the edge of the crumbling mineshaft, looking down into the shadows where his daughter was trapped. Every part of him screamed to act, to move, to reach her, but his boots felt rooted to the ground, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because in that moment, he realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment of transformation, where love and hope had to outweigh terror and instinct. Beside him, Standing Eagle's calm presence grounded the chaos storming through his soul. The Apache leader spoke not with urgency, but with clarity, and it was that clarity that Tobias needed most. The words were not a command. They were a gift. "This is your first test, Tobias Whitfield, not the one I planned, but the one the spirits have given." And Tobias, his heart aching, nodded. He didn't know what it meant to take a test of spirit, but he knew what it meant to be a father. And if this was what it took to save Emma, he would give the mountain his last breath. Silent Thunder stepped forward like a figure from a dream, old and lined with years of experience. His movements were steady, assured. This wasn't a man merely clinging to old superstitions. This was someone who understood the world in a way that bridged nature and wisdom. As he placed colored stones and small bones around the mine entrance, his chanting began, low and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the earth. "He's asking the mountain spirits to hold steady," Standing Eagle translated, "but he's also listening to the mine speak." Tobias listened too. He heard the cracking of old wooden beams, the sigh of shifting stone, and the small, terrified voice of his daughter drifting up like a prayer. "Daddy, I'm scared." It broke something in him, but also lit a fire. He called back gently, willing his voice to be a tether she could hold onto. "I'm coming, sweetheart. I've got you." The plan was risky, nearly impossible. The shaft was barely holding together. One wrong move would send it crashing down. Swift Hawk, a young and nimble Apache warrior, was prepared to descend. He had done it before. But Tobias knew, deep in his soul, that Emma wouldn't respond to a stranger. Not while she was injured and afraid. If someone unfamiliar touched her, she might flinch, and flinching could cost her life. "It has to be me," Tobias insisted. "You weigh too much," Standing Eagle replied bluntly. "The ledge won't hold." "Then teach me," Tobias said, eyes blazing. "Teach me how to move like your warriors. I don't care how dangerous it is. She's my little girl. She needs me." Something in Standing Eagle shifted then. Respect, unspoken, passed between them, not as white man to Apache, not even as settler to warrior, but as father to father. So they prepared Tobias for the descent. Heavy boots removed, belt discarded, every ounce of unnecessary weight stripped away. "You must become part of the mountain," Standing Eagle said, "not something fighting it. Move like water, read the stone, trust your steps." Tobias memorized every word. Then Silent Thunder pressed a hand against his arm and spoke in broken English. "Mountain spirits test heart," he said softly. "You go down as white man. Come up, father." With the braided rope around his waist and a prayer in his chest, Tobias began the descent. The first rung creaked beneath his bare foot. He froze, waited, Silent Thunder's chant intensified, and miraculously, the groaning stopped. Step by careful step, Tobias moved downward, every motion gentle, precise. He pressed his hands against the cold walls, feeling for vibration, for weakness. He thought of Emma's tiny face, her laughter, the way she clutched her blanket in sleep. Each memory was a heartbeat that pulled him lower into the darkness. At last, he saw her, curled on a narrow ledge, her leg twisted unnaturally, tears streaking her dirt-smudged face. "Daddy," she sobbed, reaching for him. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her gaze. "We're going to get out of here. I promise." He lowered himself beside her with the grace of someone who no longer doubted the ground beneath him. He wrapped her in his arms, not tight, just enough to make her feel safe, and began to loop the rescue rope around them both. Above them, the mountain groaned again. The Apache were pulling faster now, sensing the danger. And then, the crack. Like thunder deep within the earth, the beam above them began to break. Tobias pressed Emma against his chest, shielding her with his own body as stones rained down around them. He felt the rope jerk, saw dust fill the shaft, but kept whispering into her ear. "You're safe. I've got you. I love you, Emma." The light from above grew closer, then burst fully open as they were pulled from the shaft just as it collapsed behind them. They rolled onto the ground together, coughing, gasping, alive, and surrounding them, Apache warriors, kneeling with water, cloth, medicine. No one raised a weapon. No one shouted orders, only hands offering care. Love had guided them into the pit, and hope had brought them out. Blank. Blank. The dust had barely settled when Tobias clutched his daughter to his chest, his heart pounding with something greater than fear. It was love, raw, all-consuming, and so fierce that it had carried him into the earth to pull her from its closing jaws. Emma trembled against him, her little arms wrapped around his neck despite the pain in her leg. She was alive, bruised, scared, broken, but alive, and Tobias had never known such overwhelming gratitude. All around them, Apache warriors moved with a reverent calm, not as invaders or conquerors, but as protectors. They brought water to wash the blood from Emma's scraped face, cloth to bind her wounds, and salves that smelled of pine and wild herbs. One warrior knelt beside Tobias and handed him a folded piece of blue cloth. Emma gasped as she recognized it. Her blanket, the one she had given away to a dying man. It was cleaned, carefully mended, and still smelled faintly of wildflowers. The warrior did not speak. He only bowed his head and left it in Emma's lap before rising and disappearing into the ranks. Silent Thunder approached next, his eyes bright with something ancient and kind. Without a word, he examined Emma's leg, whispering softly in Apache. Tobias watched as the old man placed his hands on her ankle, then her knee, then pressed gently along the break. Emma didn't cry out. She only winced and clutched her father's shirt tighter. "She will heal," Standing Eagle said quietly, "but her recovery will take time, and she must be cared for with the same devotion she gave to our warrior." Tobias nodded, brushing a strand of Emma's tangled hair from her face. "Whatever she needs, I'll do anything. You already have," the Apache leader replied, his tone warm now. "You trusted us." And he had, against all his instincts. Tobias had trusted not just in their methods, but in their hearts. He had seen past the painted faces, the silence, the centuries of mistrust. In that dark mine, among groaning beams and falling stone, he had discovered that love didn't care about culture, and hope didn't recognize boundaries. Now, above ground, that same spirit was echoed in every action taken by the Apache around him. But peace was fleeting. From the ridge above, the thunder of hooves rolled like an oncoming storm. Tobias turned toward the sound just as Lieutenant Morrison's cavalry patrol crested the hill. 24 armed men in blue uniforms, rifles drawn, eyes wide with alarm at the sight before them. A white settler on the ground, his injured daughter in his arms, and 200 Apache warriors surrounding them. To an outsider, it looked like a massacre waiting to happen. Morrison's voice rang out, sharp with authority but cracking beneath it. "This is Lieutenant Morrison of the 5th Cavalry. Release your hostages or we will open fire." Tobias barely had time to react before the Apache did something that stunned him and silenced the threat. One by one, they dismounted. One by one, they laid their weapons on the ground. One by one, they raised their hands. A wave of silence followed. It was more powerful than any war cry, more striking than any display of strength. Morrison's jaw dropped in disbelief. They surrendered? Standing Eagle stepped forward, his arms raised in peace. We are not here for war. We are here for a child. A child who showed us more honor in a single act than most men do in a lifetime. The lieutenant's confusion was visible. He looked at Tobias, at Emma, at the surrendered warriors, trying to make sense of a world that had shifted while he was still riding toward it. They saved us, Tobias said, rising to his feet and cradling Emma. They didn't harm a soul. They risked everything to bring her back. Morrison hesitated, his hand still near his weapon. But his eyes softened. The truth was too powerful to deny. He lowered his carbine. Emma stirred in Tobias's arms. Daddy? She whispered. I'm here, he whispered back, kissing her forehead. We're safe now. Standing Eagle stepped closer, a small smile touching his weathered face. You have passed the first test. Tobias Whitfield. Tobias blinked. The first? There are 2 more, the Apache leader said, but you've shown us something few ever do. The strength to place your child's life above your fear. That is a father's love. And it gives us hope. Hope. That word lingered in Tobias's chest like the last light of a setting sun. He looked at the men around him, Apache warriors offering aid. Cavalry soldiers lowering their weapons. A little girl wrapped in her beloved blanket once more. And in all of it, he saw not enemies, but people. People bound by something deeper than law or history. Bound by the simple truth that love, when freely given, could heal wounds no treaty ever could. Blank. Blank. The sun had risen higher now, casting long rays over the chaos that hovered like smoke in the morning air. Tobias held Emma in his arms, her breath shallow against his chest. Though covered in dust and exhaustion, her small frame trembled with relief. She was safe, for now. But the world above was shifting again. The cavalry had arrived. The rhythmic beat of hooves echoed across the hills, accompanied by the glint of rifles and the stiff posture of trained soldiers. 24 men in blue uniforms rode with rigid formation, their carbines raised and eyes wide as they took in the unbelievable sight below. 200 Apache warriors stood silently, hands raised, weapons set carefully on the ground. No aggression, no chaos, just a powerful, unified display of restraint. From beneath his cavalry hat, a young officer, Lieutenant Morrison, surveyed the farm. Stunned, he saw Tobias cradling his daughter, saw Apache men kneeling with medicine and water. And it didn't compute. The textbooks, the reports, the warnings, all of it painted a different picture. One filled with fire and fury. This is Lieutenant Morrison of the 5th Cavalry, he shouted. Release your hostages immediately or we will open fire. Tobias stood slowly, cradling Emma protectively. Dust clung to his sweat-soaked shirt. His voice cracked but rang with sincerity. They're not hostages. They saved us. But Morrison didn't move. His men remained on edge, fingers tightening around their triggers. It was clear he couldn't understand, the miracle unfolding in front of him. Then, Standing Eagle stepped forward, calm, tall, and unflinching. We hold no hostages, he said evenly. We are here on a matter of honor. A rescue has taken place. No blood has been spilled. No war has begun. Morrison's voice was clipped with suspicion. I see 200 armed Apache warriors surrounding a settler's property. That's called a siege. Tobias opened his mouth to explain. But Standing Eagle lifted a hand, as if to carry the conversation with dignity. Whitfield is below ground. His daughter was trapped. We helped retrieve her, not because she is white, not because we were ordered, because she showed us honor. The words hung in the air like music only a few could hear. But Morrison's training, his youth, his fear, they were louder. Apaches don't rescue settlers, he said, his voice trembling. They raid them. From the mouth of the mineshaft, a rumble echoed again. The collapsed structure groaned like a living beast. Rocks shifted and fell. Dust curled up from the earth. It was enough. Morrison paled. They're executing hostages, he shouted. Open fire. The first volley of gunshots cracked like thunder through the field. But then, something remarkable happened. Not one Apache warrior reached for a weapon. Not one retaliated. Instead, they stood still, hands raised, eyes calm. Then, in a motion as unified as any military formation, they all sat down, on the ground, in complete surrender. The cavalry froze. Even Morrison seemed caught off guard. Tobias could hear his heartbeat. So could Emma, who clung tighter to his neck. Standing Eagle remained standing, his voice clear as a bell across the chaos. "Stop shooting. The child and her father are safe. They are alive." Silence followed. One by one, cavalry rifles lowered, fingers eased off triggers, eyes searched faces. And finally, Morrison's own rifle dropped to his side. What is going on?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Tobias stepped forward, his daughter's arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "Lieutenant, these men saved my child. They risked everything to bring her out of that collapsing mine." Morrison looked at him like he was speaking in riddles. Why would they do that?" Standing Eagle answered, his voice filled not with pride, but with something even stronger, reverence. "Because this child," he said, gesturing gently to Emma, "gave comfort to one of our dying. She offered kindness, without expectation. She gave her most precious belonging, her blanket, and held the hand of a warrior as he passed into the spirit world." The story swept across the soldiers like a warm wind chasing away a storm. Emma, still in her father's arms, lifted her face from his shoulder. Her cheeks were tear-streaked, her eyes wide with confusion. "Daddy," she whispered, "why were they going to shoot?" Tobias kissed her temple. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, people are afraid of what they don't understand. But love helps us see clearer." And here it was, hope, in the middle of what could have been a battlefield, in the arms of a broken father, in the stillness of warriors who chose mercy over retaliation, in the eyes of a child who reminded them all what honor truly meant. For the first time, Morrison looked at the Apache not with suspicion, but with wonder. He saw the quiet dignity in their silence, the unwavering commitment in their surrender, the profound respect in their treatment of the child. Tobias stepped toward him, still holding Emma. They didn't come to hurt anyone. They came because of her. Because she reminded them that compassion still exists. Even here. Morrison took a long breath. His shoulders dropped, and finally, he nodded. There would be no battle today. Instead, there would be understanding. And in that shared space, between warriors, settlers, and soldiers, a bridge of hope quietly built itself. Blank. Blank. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, bathing the Kansas plains in a warm, golden light that somehow softened the dust and blood still clinging to Tobias's skin. He stood barefoot in the dirt, Emma in his arms, her face buried in his shoulder. They were covered in dust and trembling from exhaustion. But they were alive, and around them stood 200 Apache warriors, not as conquerors, not as foes, but as a wall of silent guardians. When the mine collapsed behind them in a cloud of stone and smoke, the world had held its breath. But Tobias hadn't looked back. He had only looked down, at Emma, her corn silk hair now streaked with grime, her eyes blinking open slowly. "I've got you," he whispered, over and over again, as if speaking the words would make them more real. "You're safe, sweetheart, you're safe." Across the clearing, Standing Eagle approached, his face solemn, yet softened with something more profound. "Respect, gratitude, even love. You have done what few men have," the Apache leader said, his voice quiet but resolute. "You descended into the mountain not just as a father, but as a believer, in our way, in your daughter, in something more than yourself." Tobias didn't answer right away. He could barely speak through the knot of emotion rising in his throat. His arms ached from the tension of the rescue, his legs from the trembling fear. But none of it mattered. Emma's tiny hand clutched his shirt. Her head rested on his shoulder. And for him, that was everything. "Thank you," he finally managed, eyes meeting Standing Eagle's. "For saving us. For helping me save her." A murmur moved through the gathered Apache like wind rustling through leaves, not loud, not chaotic, just a silent recognition. A bond had been forged in the fire of the earth, and the love between a father and daughter had proven stronger than the collapsing mountain. Stronger than history, stronger than hate. Emma stirred, blinking up at the faces around her. "Daddy," she whispered, "why are they all looking at me?" Tobias kissed her forehead gently. "Because you did something beautiful, sweetheart. You gave someone comfort when they needed it most. And that's something no one here will ever forget." From behind the Apache ranks came a gentle call, and Silent Thunder emerged with a small bundle wrapped in leather. He approached Tobias and unwrapped the parcel carefully, revealing a folded blue wool blanket. Emma gasped softly, "My blanket." Tobias looked in awe at the fabric, restored, cleaned, but unmistakably hers. The sunflowers his wife had sewn still danced along the edge. The tears in the corner had been mended with thread that looked like it had come from another world. Lone Wolf's spirit guided us to where he had left it. Standing Eagle explained, "He wished your daughter to have it back. As a gift, as a thank you." Emma reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the wool as though she were touching a miracle. Then she clutched it to her chest and held it close. Tobias couldn't stop the tears that spilled over. Not for the first time that morning. And not for the last. This wasn't just a blanket anymore. It was a symbol of love given freely, of honor passed between hearts, of the simple, powerful truth that the greatest acts often come from the smallest hands. The cavalry stood at a distance now, unsure of their role in a scene that had rewritten everything they thought they knew. Lieutenant Morrison had lowered his weapon completely, watching the proceedings not with suspicion now, but wonder. The story he'd been taught didn't make room for this kind of grace. He stepped forward slowly, looking between the Apache warriors and Tobias. "I don't understand," he admitted. "Why would they? Why would you all risk so much for a settler's child?" Standing Eagle answered him with quiet pride. "Because she is no longer just a settler's child. She honored our dead, she showed compassion without cause. And in doing so, she became one of us." The words hit Morrison like a wave, but instead of arguing, he simply nodded. Then, looking at Tobias, he said, "You're lucky, Mr. Whitfield." Tobias shook his head, smiling as he looked at Emma, who had already drifted into a light sleep in his arms. "No, Lieutenant, I'm not lucky, I'm blessed." Standing Eagle took a step closer, raising his hand over Emma's head in blessing. Then he turned to Tobias and clasped his arm. "You have passed the first test," he said, "but this is only the beginning. There are 2 more, and they will show the world whether you are worthy of guiding this girl who now walks in 2 worlds." Tobias didn't flinch, his voice was steady. "Then I'll walk both worlds too." For her, it wasn't a promise made in desperation. It was one forged in love. And where love walked, hope always followed. Blank. Blank. The dust had barely settled on the collapsed mineshaft when a new silence took hold of the Whitfield farm, this time not out of fear, but from reflection. Tobias sat beside Emma, her broken leg bandaged with careful Apache hands. Her blue blanket nestled in her lap like a sacred relic. She was safe, but the journey wasn't over. Standing Eagle stepped forward once more, his voice as steady as the sunrise. "There are 2 more tests. Tobias Whitfield, you've proven your courage, now you must prove your heart." Tobias nodded, exhausted but unflinching. "What do you need me to do?" The Apache leader glanced toward Emma, who was resting quietly in her father's arms, her eyes heavy with fatigue but open, watching, listening. "The second test," Standing Eagle said, "is to understand what your daughter gave when she offered her blanket to Lone Wolf. It was her most treasured possession, a part of her mother's love, a piece of home. She gave it freely for the comfort of someone who had nothing." Tobias's eyes lowered, the memory of his wife's careful stitches playing in his mind like a dream. That blanket had been the only thing Emma had left from her mother. And yet she had given it without hesitation. "You must offer a sacrifice of equal weight," Standing Eagle continued, "something that defines you, something precious." Tobias nodded slowly, though he feared what might come next. Standing Eagle turned toward the barn, the house, the fields stretching beyond. "Your land, your farm, everything you've built, this is your treasure. And now, we ask you to give it up." The words hit Tobias like a punch to the chest. The farm was more than land. It was his entire life. Every board and beam had been nailed by his hand, every inch of soil tilled by his sweat. It was where he'd built a future for Emma, a dream he'd clung to after burying her mother. It was her inheritance, Her security. Lieutenant Morrison stepped forward, bristling with disbelief. Now wait just a minute. He can't be expected to give away his property. That's not justice, it's theft. But Standing Eagle raised his hand, calm and unwavering. This is not a demand. It is a test. And the test is not about the deed, it is about the willingness. Tobias didn't move. He looked down at Emma, her big, trusting eyes watching him with complete faith. She had given her blanket to a dying man without being asked, without being told, without thinking twice. What kind of father would he be if he could not match her heart? He swallowed hard, his voice rough as gravel. If I give you this farm, where will we go? How will I care for her? That, Standing Eagle said gently, is not our concern. Your daughter gave all she had in a moment of love. Can you do the same? Silence fell over the land. The cavalry stood still. The Apache waited. Even the wind seemed to pause. Tobias looked at the farmhouse, its whitewashed walls fading in the summer sun. The fence he built after his wife died. The apple tree that Emma had planted the year before. Every memory clung to that soil like roots too deep to pull. But then he looked again at Emma, alive, safe, her heart as open as the sky. And suddenly, the weight of those memories shifted. What mattered most wasn't the soil. It was her. I'll do it, he said. If that's the price of being worthy of raising her, I'll pay it. Standing Eagle nodded, but then smiled softly. You do not need to, he said. You've already passed. Tobias blinked. What? The test was not to lose your land, Tobias Whitfield. It was to be willing to place your daughter's honor above your own comfort, to understand the depth of her sacrifice. Tobias exhaled, trembling with relief. A few of the Apache warriors smiled behind their still expressions, the kind of smile that carried both approval and admiration. Emma stirred, clutching his shirt. You were going to give away our farm? For you, sweetheart, Tobias whispered. For your heart, for what you did. She leaned against him, whispering something too soft to hear. But he felt it in his bones. A daughter's love. Standing Eagle stepped closer again. There is one final test. Tobias straightened, ready for whatever came next. You must promise to raise her in both worlds. Teach her the Apache ways. And your own. Honor who she is now, not just the child she was before. Tobias looked at Emma and saw it clearly. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was the girl who had bridged two worlds with a blanket and a lullaby. The girl who had turned grief into healing. I promise, he said quietly. I will raise her to know both sides of who she is. Standing Eagle reached into his pouch and pulled out the blue wool blanket, Emma's. But altered, it was cleaned and sewn with new thread, but now bore a single Apache symbol at the corner, a hand reaching toward a star. She has been marked by her kindness, Standing Eagle said. Now she is marked by our respect. He placed the blanket in Emma's lap. Her eyes widened as she traced the new stitching with her fingers. It's even more special now, she whispered. You are more special now, Tobias replied, kissing her temple. The Apache warriors began to mount their horses. Before leaving, Standing Eagle placed a hand gently on Emma's head, then turned to Tobias. When she is older, she will be welcome in any Apache camp. She is one of us. Tobias nodded. And I will make sure she never forgets it. As the warriors rode away, and the cavalry slowly followed, Tobias sat beneath the cottonwood tree with Emma in his arms. He had nearly lost everything. But instead, he had gained something immeasurable. A daughter whose heart had changed the world around her. And a future filled not with fear, but with love. And endless, boundless hope. Blank. Blank. The sun slipped beneath the Kansas horizon, casting long streaks of amber and rose across the open land. The warmth of the day remained in the breeze, gentle and full of promise. Tobias sat on the porch of the farmhouse, his farmhouse, with Emma tucked close beside him. Her injured leg propped gently on a cushion, the blue blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl of memory. The land was quiet now, but it felt fuller than ever before, not with noise, but with peace. A peace that had not come from treaties or soldiers, but from something simpler, something deeper, an act of love, given freely, and the hope it had planted in the hearts of those who witnessed it. Emma's head rested against his arm. Her voice was small, thoughtful. Daddy, I didn't know giving someone a blanket could cause so much trouble. Tobias smiled, running a hand gently through her hair. Sometimes, sweetheart, the most important things we do seem like the smallest things at the time. She nodded slowly, as if turning that truth over in her young heart. You showed kindness to someone who needed it, he continued, and that changed everything. And it had. In the days and weeks that followed the rescue. The story of Emma Whitfield, 8-year-old settler girl who cradled a dying Apache warrior, spread like wildfire across the Kansas territory. But it wasn't told with fear or suspicion. It was told with reverence, respect, awe, and slowly, the hearts of many who had only known division began to soften. Emma recovered, her leg healing under the careful watch of both frontier doctors and Apache medicine. And with each day, she carried her experience not as a burden, but as a beacon. She became fluent in Apache, learning the language of the people who had once stood as symbols of fear in frontier towns. She sat beside Silent Thunder, listening to his stories. She walked among the women of the Mescalero, learning crafts passed down through generations. And she never stopped asking questions, never stopped offering kindness. Years passed, and with time, Emma grew into a woman unlike any other the region had known. She became a teacher, a bridge between two cultures that had once seemed irreconcilable. In her classroom, children of settlers and children of the Apache sat side by side, learning letters and numbers, but also stories of both worlds. Stories of bravery, stories of sorrow, and stories of hope. She taught them that honor could come from anyone, that compassion could be stronger than fear, that love was not bound by race, language, or blood. Tobias never remarried. He poured his life into raising Emma, guiding her, supporting her as she carved a path that no one else could walk. And though he had once feared losing her to another world, he came to see that she belonged to both, and that both had made her whole. The Whitfield farm became something more than a home. It became a gathering place, a sanctuary, a symbol. Apache elders visited regularly, not as guests, but as kin. Settlers came too, not to gawk or question, but to learn, to listen, and sometimes, just to sit under the cottonwood trees and breathe. When Emma married, years later, to a kind man who had also walked both roads, Apache warriors came to her wedding. They brought gifts, songs, and blessings that had not been heard in white ceremonies before. But they were welcomed, celebrated, honored. At the center of it all, Emma stood with the same blanket she had once given away, now carefully preserved. It had been stitched with symbols from both cultures. The sunflower pattern her mother had sewn still bloomed at its edge. And near it, an Apache hand reaching for a star, a mark of a girl who had lit the path for two nations to walk together. The blanket became a family heirloom, passed from mother to daughter, father to son, not as a relic of sorrow, but as a torch of remembrance. It reminded each generation that the strongest bridges are built not from politics or power, but from love given in moments of fear, and hope born from the act of seeing humanity in another. Tobias lived to see many sunsets beside his daughter, and in every one, he saw the spark of that first moment, when she chose to sit beside a dying man. Not out of obligation, but out of compassion. When he passed, it was quietly, peacefully, beneath the same cottonwood trees where Emma had once played. He was buried with two things: the small rifle he had carried through that harrowing day, and a single feather gifted to him by Standing Eagle, a sign of honor that no other settler had ever earned. Emma continued to teach until the end of her days, and when she passed, her students, both white and Apache, spoke of her not as a teacher, but as a guardian of peace, a daughter of two worlds, a soul whose light had changed their lives. The story of Emma Whitfield was told across the territory for generations, not as legend, but as truth, as a reminder that sometimes, the smallest act of kindness, a blanket, a song, a child's hand, can echo through time, and that in the heart of love, there is always hope.